and welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. My child is fine at school, but completely explosive and violent at home. Okay, so this is a sentence that parents of PDA children and teens, especially externalized, say a lot. And today I want to explore this topic on a deeper level than we have before in social media, at least, and talk about masking and camouflaging or internalizing the threat response from a polyvagal perspective. Okay, so what is polyvagal theory? Casey, why are you talking about polyvagal theory? It sounds very esoteric. But really what we want to understand about polyvagal theory is that it's expanding our understanding of the nervous system from fight, flight, freeze, and expanding it into understanding also shutdown and collapse and other hybrid states like appeasement and fawning, okay? The second thing that polyvagal theory gives us is a better understanding of how nervous system activation and the perception of threat impact how the body works. What happens to the organs? What happens metabolically? What happens with the hormones, right? And this is important for our community here because our children's basic needs are so impacted, right? We have children who stop speaking. We have children whose legs don't work. We have children or teens who haven't been able to access teeth brushing, hygiene, bathing for 6 months. We have children who are moving into a non-24-hour sleep cycle. We have children who can't sleep or teens and tweens who can't sleep unless they have their parent's body physically against them as a nervous system signal of safety. And then we have children like my child who stopped eating, right? But we also have PDA children and teens who are constantly eating, right? All of these are basic needs and they're causally related to what's going on inside of our children and teens' nervous systems and bodies, right? So normally when we think about things like fight, flight, and freeze, we're really thinking about the behavior and we're not as attuned to what's going on inside the body. So today I want to link that a bit for you with a specific question, which I started this with, which is, my child is fine at school, but explosive and violent at home. What's going on? Okay, so in the neurodiversity community, there's a lot of talk about masking and camouflaging, okay? But the way that I've found it helpful for parents and even parents who are PDA themselves to understand is that we can think of masking or camouflaging conceptually in two ways. And this helps us distinguish between learned behavior and nervous system response. So the most commonly spoke about form of masking is learning neurotypical norms and social behaviors and repeating them in social environments so that it is not so apparent that one is neurodivergent, autistic, ADHD, right? So parents have the great question of asking, well, how is it possible that my 3 or 4 or 5-year-old is masking when they are just going to school for the first time, right? How is it so stark, this difference? And that's when we can start to think about a second conceptual form of masking or camouflaging, which I equate to internalizing the threat response, which looks like the fine at school. We're going to parse and expand this fine that we talk about. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about the nervous system response as it relates to masking, which is really when we see even toddlers who look completely different in different contexts to the point where like it's hard for a parent to even articulate or explain this and people don't believe it. They're like, well, that's an exaggeration or something must be going on at home or the school says, you can't mask autism to that extent. We've never seen a child who could mask like that. And I always say, well, that's because they were masking, but that's another topic. Okay, so what does this look like? Let me illustrate this for you guys with examples of my own son and how I started to notice it as a parent, because it was very subtle, the shift, the nervous system shift, okay? So my son appeared very neurotypical in a lot of contexts and seemed fine. Fine being compliant, non-disruptive, not disrupting the class, engaging in the materials, not necessarily like connection engagement, but just not like disrupting, okay? So when he was sort of going to public school, he would be able to go some days and not others. I would walk the 3 blocks to our public school, which we no longer go to, and pick him up. And he would come out of the building and I would literally see his face change. Like I would see it come down, the mask come off, and I would see the tension rise. And as he would often have his bike and he would be riding home and he would put his pacifier in his mouth. And as soon as we got home, it was meltdown central. Okay. But that face change, and I would see it also when he would get into a car where he had been in public. And it wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't like, oh, now I'm not having to make friends, or I don't want people to think I'm weird. So now that I'm with mom, I can sort of like be my goofy self and stim. It was much more like a physiological change that you can notice in his face, his body language, his tone. Similar when, even before he went to school, he would spend 1 night a week at his grandmother's house when we still lived in the Washington, D.C. area. And he would eat more. He would go to sleep early. He would sleep in. He would not talk very much, but totally like be compliant and quiet and not the whirling dervish he was. And the second my husband or I walked into her apartment, I could see his body speed up and he would start like knocking things over, breaking things, throwing himself on the ground, screaming. And it was like this immediate shift. And we were just like, what is happening? Okay. And then additionally, my son would mask during therapy and autism evaluations. So people thought we were crazy. They were like, this kid isn't autistic. He's like a totally neurotypical kid. Right? And there's this incredibly stressful catch-22 for parents like us because every cell in our body wants to be seen and understood and to understand how to help our kids, right? But we can't communicate, or people don't believe us that like this is really Jekyll and Hyde. Like there are 2 different children here, right? And so part of us wants them in these scenarios to explode or behave like they do at home so people can see, like, I'm not exaggerating. But at the same time, if they move into that level of activation, we've crossed the threshold and they're suffering. They're in pain. So it's like parents want them to get to that point sometimes when they're at school in an assessment, an eval, or with a grandparent, because they want to be like, look, I'm telling the truth about what happens at home, right? But once the child's in that state, the parent also is suffering because their child's in pain and having nervous system activation that is the same sounds and body movements and facial expressions of like a child being attacked by an animal, right? So it's like this terrible catch-22 that we have, right? So this leads to a very, very valid question that I want to validate for you, and think about how I'm going to answer this as you're communicating to therapists, teachers, pediatricians, doctors, and the people who don't believe us, right? Because they're thinking through the lens of masking as a learned behavior to imitate neurotypical norms, whereas we want to be able to explain this dichotomy and how much they mask in certain settings through the nervous system, through a polyvagal lens, okay? So parents, I love this question so much. It reflects to me such a nuance and such a great question that parents ask. It's one of my favorite questions. So how can children control their masking if it's a nervous system response? Because Casey, what you've taught us is if it's coming from this part of the brain, which is survival, it's not under their frontal lobe control. It's not under their conscious control. So how could they mask in these certain scenarios and it's always so consistent? Okay, so I love this. I love this question. And it has to do with the neuroception of safety. Okay, so what do I mean by neuroception? Neuroception is a term coined by Dr. Stephen Porges, who is the father of polyvagal theory, and it is the preperceptual awareness of three things. I'm safe, I'm in danger, I'm gonna die. Okay? And what's unique about our PDA children and teens is that perception is going on all the time related to autonomy, equality, our agendas, our expectations, at the same time that they have their frontal lobe and they might not even be aware of it, right? Like they can be playing a game. Like my son plays football on a team. He loves it. He loves playing tackle football. But this red part of his brain, the neuroception, preperceptual, and unrelated to his emotional attachment or fun of football, is perceiving that kid ran faster than me. The coach is telling me to hurry up. I have to get in this line, and all of these losses of autonomy. So at the same time he's having fun and doing his special interest, he's perceiving threat. Okay, so this is also what makes it unique from trauma. Because in a trauma situation, you have evocative cues of something terrible that happened or was repeated, right? Whereas with our PDA children and teens, they can actually really have a very close emotional relationship to the parent and attachment, but because of what we're doing as parents thinking they're neurotypical, they're constantly perceiving threat with us because we're like, you have to finish your food before you have your dessert, pick up your shoes, don't leave them on the ground. All of these things are registering in that part of the brain. Okay. So this part of the brain is not under our control. It is what keeps us alive, and it's meant to be working in a way that's pre-perceptual, okay, before we can think. Because it's what keeps the antelope alive when there's a lion. They just start running or they feign dead. Okay. So what does this have to do with masking? What does this have to do with school? What does this have to do with the grandparents? What's happening is they're not actually fine. Okay. What's happening is this part of the brain is choosing a pathway for the nervous system, and the fight flight comes before the shutdown, okay? In polyvagal theory, it's hierarchical. You're going to go into fight flight before you go into collapse, okay? So when the brain perceives that there's just no safety, there's no unconditional love of the home, there's no mom there, there is a classroom of 26 kids with rules and compliance, right? They have to do what they have to do. So the brain is perceiving, I can't go into fight flight. So I'm going to choose a different pathway. And this is, again, not conscious. So what are all the nervous system states that look like they're fine, but actually a lot's going on inside the body? I'm going to talk about 4 states. Okay, with the caveat that we're on the edge of knowledge with polyvagal theory. I'm in a polyvagal certificate course with the Polyvagal Institute right now. So I'm in these conversations and understanding where the debates are. So I'm going to do the little caveats for you. The 4 states that can look fine to a teacher are freeze, fawning, appeasement, and shutdown. Okay, because none of those states are going to cause disruption externally or behavioral problems that will disrupt the classroom. However, that doesn't mean that the child or the teen is not experiencing the metabolic mobilization and immobilization that's occurring when the brain is perceiving threat. Okay, are you with me? I hope so. All right, so let's start with freeze. Freeze is like the deer in the headlights, okay? So what does this mean? We have mobilization, we have fight flight energy where there's actual mobilization. It's called sympathetic, right? So we have adrenaline, cortisol, metabolism speeding up, all the things. But then we also have immobilization, right? So there's all this stuff going on in the body, but we're immobilized. So the child or teen is in freeze. the deer in the headlights, and they might just be sitting there like not saying anything, watching, not disturbing, not touching anything, not bugging anybody, but they're in a freeze state, which is fight, flight, or mobilization energy with some immobilization, which is also called dorsal in polyvagal theory. That's like the shutdown, feigning dead collapse. Okay, so that's the first hybrid state that looks fine. Okay, the second is fawning. Okay, so fawning and appeasement are the two that I have asterisks around because this is something that's being written about and explored right now in the community of researchers and scholars studying this. Okay, so fawning is also a hybrid state where there is some mobilization and some immobilization, but it can be dissociative and compliant and sort of just like the auto yes, okay, I'm just going to do whatever they tell me to get through this, right? Appeasement is also a hybrid state, but it recruits the social engagement system for survival. What does that mean? Monitoring the authority figure and capitulating them or doing whatever they need so that they protect you or that their needs are met as the teacher so you're safe, okay? This is a nervous system response. It might look like best student in the class doing everything the teacher wants, right? And this fawning and appeasement often go with an internalized expression of PDA, okay? But again, metabolically, the organs, the nervous system, there is mobilization and immobilization stuff. It's not a safe and social state. And I'm going to explain again why that matters. Finally, we have the dorsal, which is the full shutdown. That's the antelope who can't outrun the lion, who knows instinctually in their survival system that predators don't eat dead prey. And so the survival response is just to and it's not even playing dead, it's collapse. And it actually changes the metabolic state to appear dead, right? So like the heart can actually stop beating and the lungs, there's actual like changes, right? So like blood rushes away from the extremities and the heart rate goes way down. And you can't stay in a full dorsal state because you can die, right? So we always have to be moving between states. So dorsal for a child who's fine at school, and, hopefully, I'm not blaming the teachers here. I think it's a structural issue where they don't have the support or the resources to manage an individual child's nervous system in the context of 26 kids where they're encouraged to do behavioral approaches. So I'm not blaming the teachers here. But just because of the design of our system, at least in the United States, a teacher could be viewing a child in complete shutdown as fine. Okay, so what does that look like? A child in a turtle shell, like just completely curled up into a turtle shell, selective mutism, not able to speak, hiding under the desk, sleeping under the desk, collapsing on head on the table. Okay, so these are all states that teachers might see, and I don't blame them for not being able to manage it without the structural support that they need and the encouragement from administrators. But this could be a child who looks fine, okay? Then the next logical question becomes, well, Casey, how do you know, right? How do you know if this kid actually is like loving school like I did as a child, sort of teacher's pet, always raising her hand, blah, blah, blah. And I was doing it because I loved to learn, versus the child who's doing it as an appeasement response. And as I'm talking about this, I want you guys to reflect if any of these states or experiences apply to you as a parent, just as like a little tidbit. How do we know? So the first thing we can do is we can look closely in the moment. Okay, so there are things that will tell us if we look closely and get to know our children, like, are they in a freeze state or are they just resting, right? Where it's like an optimal amount of arousal. They're taking in information. They don't necessarily have to be verbally engaging, but we want to know the difference. And so we can look at body language. We can look at how their face is moving, because this is going to get a little dorky, but like with the vagus nerve, it innervates the entire face. Okay, so you can actually read on someone's face, are they in safe and social? You can read it in their voice, okay? So like, I want to show you guys a picture, okay? So this is me smiling. And I have a lot of pictures like this before I learned about PDA and what was going on with my son, where I have a smile, but the upper half of my face is like frozen because I'm actually in an activated state, like gripping against life. Because real safe and social happens here, right? So like there's a difference between a smile that's like, and a smile that's truly indicating I'm in safe and social, and my face signals to you as a mammal, like I'm not going to hurt you, right? So this is all happening subconsciously. But when a child is sort of frozen in this part of the face, you can see that they're not actually in safe and social. And I've learned to look at this with my child. It's the first thing I look at. I look into his eyes. Are they sparkly? Or are they kind of like, tunnel vision? Or, is he able to move this part of his face, or is he sort of frozen? Here's another little anecdote just to like hit it for you guys. So when I was in graduate school, I was 26 years old when I started having severe panic attacks and was diagnosed with panic disorder. And before that, I did not think I was like a sensitive or anxious person, which is hilarious. Now that I'm 42, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sensitive. But when I started to have panic attacks, a lot of things happened. I couldn't smile. My mouth was like frozen, and not my husband, my boyfriend at the time, would like make fun of me because I couldn't smile. My mouth was like frozen because I was in such an activated state. I couldn't use this part of the vagus nerve because I wasn't in a safe and social state. It also impacted me metabolically, right? I was sort of in a freeze state, and then it was tipping over into fight flight in these panic attacks. And I lost 20 pounds. Okay. And that's not because I was like trying to not eat. My metabolism was speeding up so much that I couldn't eat the food. Like I would get nauseous. I would throw up. I would have diarrhea. Sorry to be TMI, but like this is what happens. Because think about it. If you're an antelope on the plains with a lion, you don't want a full stomach. You certainly don't want to eat food, and you need to get rid of fluids to run. Right? So like this is happening on a metabolic level for our kids. And I'm going to relate it to the basic needs as the last part. But sometimes with anecdotes, it helps hit the brain centers in a different way. Okay? So we look closely. And the second we look closely at their face, we look closely at their body movements, the tone of their voice. The second thing we want to do is look at their behaviors, their nervous system expressions in safety. Okay, so when they come home from school, when they come home from the assessment or the evaluation, when they leave the grandparents' house, what is the behavior? Okay, so if they were in complete safe and social, or safe and social most of the time, moving between a little bit of, mobilization and back down to safe and social, they're not going to have all this built up stress where all of a sudden it's coming out. Okay, because remember I said it was hierarchical. This is part of Polyvagal Theory, where like first you're going to go into fight or flight. And then if your brain perceives you can't fight or flee your way out, you're going to drop into dorsal, which is shut down. So if your child has dropped into dorsal somewhat, either in a hybrid state of freeze, fawning, or appeasement, or has gone into shutdown in what looks like fine, once they get home and neurocept safety with you, they will move back up through fight flight because they're coming out of the immobilized state. That's how the hierarchy of the nervous system works. Okay? It sucks. Absolutely. Like it totally sucks for the parent. But paradoxically, it's also a signal that they're safe with you, that their brain is perceiving safety. And what sucks, I'm not being very like articulate by using the word sucks, but it's just what it feels like, is that we get blamed for this fight flight state of like, well, something must be going on at home, or, they don't act like that with me. But what it's actually a reflection of is like the preperceptual awareness of safety, the neuroception of safety, and the nervous system reacting in kind, okay? So it's not because of you that your child behaves like this, okay? So let's bring it back to basic needs and the PDA experience. As I mentioned, the safe and social, and then we have the like mobilization, we have the hybrid states, and then we have immobilization. So what's happening on these different levels? Mobilization, as I mentioned, which results in fight-flight behavior. It speeds up the metabolism. It can lead to tummy aches, throwing up, diarrhea, accidents, what we call toops or sharts, like a tooth that turns into a fart or a fart that turns into a shit. Anyways, you gotta have humor with this life that we're living or else we'll just cry all the time. Okay, a lack of hunger, not being able to eat, not being able to sleep at night because you're wired, right? Immobilization, what's happening? Metabolism is slowing down. Okay? That means like motility is slowing down. That means like constipation and caprices, UTIs from withholding, tummy aches. Okay? Let me go back to the example with my son at my grandma's, at his granny's house. And now he doesn't mask with her anymore and they have a great relationship. They did. He still has fond memories of that time. It's just his body was responding to the perception of safety or lack thereof. So we would always call it granny magic when he would go over to her apartment overnight in Washington, D.C. on Saturdays, because instead of resisting bedtime and instead of staying up late and getting up at 5, wired, sometimes even screaming upon opening his eyes, he would go to bed early and he would sleep in. So we would call it granny magic. At the same time, now I understand in retrospect, it was actually more of a shutdown state and avoidance, right? Because it was too much for his nervous system to be engaging according to like the neuronormative or like typical rules of a normal, typical house. Like we don't run like a whirling dervish and scream and break things and all the things. And so his body would start to shut down and he would sleep more. And we always looked at it as like, we suck as parents because he sleeps better at granny's. Okay, so the important thing to understand from our little training today is that behavior is just the surface. Okay, this is a nervous system disability. It's a neurotype. It's not your fault. And by understanding the deep root causes of what's actually going on, we can really start to have compassion for ourselves and our children. And if we use this terminology, which is accurate, we can start to bridge those gaps in communication with some of the people in our lives who have valid questions that are annoying and make us feel not seen, right? All right, my friends, I will see you again soon. Okay, bye. Thanks everyone for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.